let's go ahead and get started with our first story, which is the Sudan conflict update. Now, we're going to backtrack a little bit here to explain the conflict to you because it's been a while since I covered that story. So first and foremost, I want to explain to you what is happening in Sudan. I have a clip here that I'm going to show. I think she actually does a really good job of breaking this down. This is Al Jazeera. Yeah, Al Jazeera English. And we're going to start off with this clip here just to give you an idea what this conflict is actually about. And then we'll get into the recent update with Sudan and whether or not Egypt will actually be able to put an end to this war. Let's get in.
Let's talk about what's happening in Sudan.
Rival forces remain locked in a power struggle despite international calls for a ceasefire.
It's an all-out battle for control of the country between Sudan's army and a paramilitary unit known as the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, led by men who used to be allies. Hundreds of people have been killed, and hundreds have been injured. There's fighting in different parts of Sudan, but it's heaviest in the capital, Khartoum. There have been attempts at a ceasefire, but they haven't lasted. There have been air attacks and shelling. The airport has been severely damaged. There's no running water or electricity. Supplies of food are running low.
Yeah, so a lot of people have vacated the area because there's no running water. The few that are left, I mean, they have no running water, no food. So we're looking at another situation where people are they're basically being forced to migrate somewhere else. You know, I played another video last time where there were people in Sudan saying they don't want to leave their home. You know, they want to stay there, but it's not safe for them to stay. And the reason why we are following this conflict is because this is actually predicted to be the next proxy war. So if Egypt is able to help end this conflict, we need to find a way to push that through.
This ridiculous battle that has civilians caught in the middle, and we have nothing to do with this.
So what's behind the fighting? Well, people in Sudan have been struggling to set up a democracy after decades under one-man rule. Omar al-Bashir came to power in a military coup in the late 1980s, became president, and stayed for 30 years, until people rose up and demanded that he step down. Then the army took over, and people didn't want them in charge either. So after pressure from protesters, the army agreed to share power with different political groups in a transitional government.
I'm just going to pause here for 1 second because she skipped over. There's something she missed in reference to Obama's presidency. Under Obama's presidency, the sanctions were actually lifted from Sudan. And now they have sanctions again. So that's an important piece I think that she should have put in there. So I just wanted to let you know about that.
The idea was that it would oversee a transition to a democratic system. But 2 years later, the army kicked out the prime minister and seized power again.
The people in Sudan seem to be trapped in this limbo, and they're going round and round in a circle that involves the same people, you know, with no clear path or trajectory on how they can actually start to plan for a transition.
There have been ongoing talks to make that transition happen between the military and political groups representing that pro-democracy movement.
Anytime we talk about government transitions in other countries, you should know this is a perfect opportunity for the U.S. government to say, oh, why don't we help them out? Why don't we take out or remove some of these leaders that they have and help them in this process? And then the people end up being worse off in those countries than they were before U.S. intervention. Just keep that in mind.
But a major reason the process is being held up is because of an underlying rivalry between the army and the Rapid Support Forces that have become like a second army. And many people see this as a personal rivalry between the army's leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who's effectively the leader of the country, and the leader of the RSF, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, widely known as Hemeti. The thing is, for years, both men were on the same side and had been since the war in Darfur. Hemeti led a militia at the time widely known as the Janjaweed. and they were used by al-Bashir's army to fight rebels in the region of Darfur.
They were created to protect the upper echelon of the military and the senior commanders.
They're accused of carrying out war crimes there, and al-Bashir actually got charged with committing genocide.
Yep.
In 2013, the militia were rebranded as the Rapid Support Forces and worked with the army on different missions. Then, in 2019, Hemeti and General al-Burhan joined up to get rid of al-Bashir. And during the big pro-democracy protests, the RSF and the army were accused of killing more than 100 people.
So notice she says here that at one point, the RSF was actually working together with the army. So at one point, they were collaborating with each other, but things did definitely change.
But since then, the RSF has been acting a lot more independently, and they've grown more powerful.
They were able to establish vast investments around the country and outside the country, especially in the gold trade.
These two main actors, the army and the rapid support forces, were able to collude, now successfully for about 4 years to stay in power themselves. But there was always that core tension about who was the top dog between them.
So that brings us to the fighting right now. As part of Sudan's transition to democracy, there have been talks about integrating the RSF into the army, but they can't agree over the timeline. The army proposed 2 years, while the RSF wanted it to be 10.
The army, had been making a stand. They realized that the rapid support forces have been growing. The head, General Hemeti, has political ambitions himself. And I think there was a sense that if they did not somehow force the rapid support forces to agree to integrate and to go under them, that this force would keep growing and grow out of the control of the formal military.
So if the RSF is growing, they're becoming a larger group at this point in time, why would they want to join the army? Think about that for a second, right?
It's unclear who started the fighting, but on April 15th, both sides started trading accusations that they had attacked each other's bases in Khartoum. Then they fought to take control of the presidential palace, the airport, and the state TV channel. The army has air power, and they've been hitting RSF bases in the capital, many of them in residential areas.
Yep.
The RSF don't have planes, but they do have anti-aircraft weapons, and they have about 100,000 men. There have been plenty of calls for the fighting to stop, from Sudan's neighbors, the African Union, the UN, the EU, the US, and the UK. And there could be some leverage from countries like Egypt, which has been a close ally to the Sudanese army, and on the other side, the UAE, which has ties to the RSF.
Okay, now this video was uploaded 2 months ago. Okay, so that's why I wanted to take you back to this video, because I wanted you to see, how this all started. And also notice that she mentioned Egypt. And why is that important? That is important because now we are actually at that place where Egypt actually may be able to interfere here and maybe put an end to this conflict altogether. But will they do it? So I have another clip that I want to show you here. This is also from Al Jazeera. By the way, if you're looking for info on Sudan, Al Jazeera covers a lot of countries. I know there's a lot of focus on like Ukraine and Russia, and sometimes it seems like the coverage is mainly just European countries when you look at other networks, but Al Jazeera, they're really good about covering those countries that I feel sometimes are ignored a little bit. But you should fact check them too, because they kind of have, they kind of have their own agenda as well. But one thing I will say is that I also saw, and I have to talk to Black Agenda Report about this, I also saw an article by Black Agenda Report about Sudan as well. But it's not discussed as much as you would think. And I think more people need to pay attention to this conflict. Now, Egypt, can they help? It seems like it could be heading that way. Now, this video was uploaded just 1 day ago. So this is the most current information. Let me just fast forward through the credits here. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoum. Egypt is attempting to end the fighting in Sudan by hosting a summit of regional leaders. But Sudan's warring sides have not been invited. The United Nations is warning the conflict could turn into a full-scale civil war that could further destabilize the region. Millions of people have already been displaced, and more fighting will likely worsen an already dire humanitarian situation.
Now, I want to jump in here for just a second in reference to millions of people have been displaced in a civil war. So again, like I told you earlier, this is predicted to be the next proxy war. This could happen, right? So you have millions of people that have been displaced from Sudan. They go to other countries, other places just to get out of the war zone. Now they are basically refugees. And I think we know the sentiment around refugees right now. Globally, there is an anti-refugee sentiment that is growing across the globe. So just keep that in mind. They may not necessarily be welcomed to the places that they're going to, but they have to flee because it's not safe to live there.
And that will have further consequences for Sudan's neighbors. So, will the Cairo summit lead to some sort of compromise? If not, what's at stake for the entire region? We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Katia Lopez Hodayan.
Months of fighting in Sudan is worrying its neighbors. Egypt's president invited leaders from countries that border Sudan to Cairo to find a solution. The UN is warning the conflict may soon turn into a full-scale civil war that could spread to other nations.
I'm sorry, I have to pause right here because look at the look on, when you look at Ethiopia, hold on. Let me pull it up here. Look at the look on his face. Ethiopia is like, why am I involved in this? Ethiopia is like, we have our own issues to deal with, man. I ain't got time for this.
That could spread to other nations.
First, we're calling on warring sides in Sudan to stop the escalation and begin serious negotiations for a ceasefire.
See the difference between what they're asking and what the U.S. government is asking in reference to Russia and Ukraine? You don't hear the Biden administration saying, first, we're asking for a ceasefire. We're calling for peace. We want some type of, resolution here. We don't want this to escalate. No, you're not hearing that. The first response is we're going to send Ukraine more money and more weapons. But here you have the leader of Egypt saying we are calling for a ceasefire. They don't want it to escalate. You see the difference? Let's go on.
Second, we call on all Sudanese parties to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian supplies and their safe passage to areas that need it most, and developing a plan to guarantee protection for humanitarian aid convoys and international relief employees to facilitate their work.
Ceasefires between Sudan's army and its rival, the Rapid Support Forces, have been repeatedly broken. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is trying to change that.
That is the translator, Ashura. What's with the blur on their video? That's there's somebody there. You guys, I can see it better than you can, but there's someone there who's actually doing sign language and they're blurring their face. Maybe that person asked to not be videotaped. Yeah, you can do that on YouTube, just FYI.
But Egypt, which historically has had close ties
now
with the Sudanese army, did not invite Sudan's warring factions to the summit.
What's known as the current government has lost control of the situation in Sudan. They've lost the trust of the neighboring countries, or you can even say of countries across the region.
The conflict has led to a major humanitarian crisis. Within 3 months, more than 3 million people in Sudan have been displaced. About 700,000 of them have gone to neighboring countries.
You hear that? So see, just pay attention to this. Over 3 million have been displaced. Over 700,000 of them have gone to different countries. So they have become refugees. And get ready for it, because I'm going to go ahead and already predict this. If this is not resolved soon and they cannot return home soon, and hoping that it'll be safe to do so, it'll only be a matter of time before these refugees are scapegoated. It'll only be a matter of time before other countries start to scapegoat these refugees and say, we have higher crime because you came here. Our cost of living is higher because you came here. You already see this happening right now in France and Germany. You see this happening in other countries. So if this is not resolved soon, and that does happen, just remember you heard it here first. Just watch. 700,000 people, that's a lot of people.
Many of which were already struggling with their own economic and political issues.
My country, Chad, is suffering due to the consequences of what's happening in Sudan. Within 1 week, we received more than 150,000 refugees, most of them women and children.
The fighting, which started in the capital, Khartoum, has now spread westward to the already devastated Darfur region. The United Nations says the bodies of at least 87 people were found in a mass grave there, and says the Rapid Support Forces may have been responsible, a claim the RSF denies. Amid a power struggle with no clear winner, there's concern of further escalation.
Does that sound familiar? A power struggle with no clear winner? Does that sound familiar? Think about Russia and Ukraine, right? It's obvious, like, Ukraine is not going to win this. It's obvious that that war needs to end. There needs to be a call for ceasefire, etc. But the fighting continues because it's encouraged by the U.S. government. Yes, when you are giving people weapons, when you are sending them money to fight, you are encouraging the escalation, contrary to what some people may say. That's why they think this may be the next proxy war.
Now the question is whether regional leaders will manage to find a solution. Katia Lopez-Odoyan for Inside Story.
Okay, so we have to keep our eye on this story. And again, a lot of people are not talking about this.